Welcome to The Conscious Artist, a new podcast designed to promote mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I'm absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. Our very first guest doesn't even need an introduction. He made his debut at the Wigmore Hall in London at the age of 15. At age 22, became the youngest faculty member in history of the Indiana University School of Music, and he won the premier Grand Prix of the Rostropovich International Competition in Paris in 1986. He is one of the most sought-after musicians and professors in the world, but more importantly, he is one of the most generous human beings I know, both with his music and his soul. I am speaking about none other than world-renowned cellist Gary Hoffman. Gary, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Pallavi.
I'm incredibly honored to have you as my first guest. Firstly, because it's you're Gary Hoffman. And secondly, because I feel like every time we have a conversation, you just share so much wisdom, so many fascinating stories and perspectives from your life. And it was for this reason that I thought you would be the perfect person to have a conversation with on the topic of authenticity as a musician. It's a topic that I've pondered many times, this concept of how to remain true to yourself as a musician, also as a human being, but we'll get there. And I feel that it's even more relevant of a question as each year and as each decade passes us by. I'd love to hear your initial thoughts on what it means for you to remain true to yourself.
Well, it's something that I think I've always been aware of, and probably, as you say, as the years go by, even more consciously so. I think it's something that I always knew was relevant and important to my life. And I think in my particular case, a lot of that would have to be traced back to the fact that I come from a family of musicians. So um, music and its place in my life and its importance beyond just the music itself, or beyond something that is obviously something that I enjoy and we all enjoy being part of, but its significance to my life and my identification with it. So I think that that's something that I grew up with, and of course, as time has gone by, and as I would say, as I've confronted, like we all do, the various issues that we do confront as musicians and people in this world in general, and this world in terms of the music world, and then when one starts to teach, trying to help young people find their way and so forth. I think these are obviously various aspects of what that means, the constant re-questioning as to why we do it, what's it about, not just what we're here for, but why we've chosen this path, which admittedly is, though there are other difficult paths in life, but not the easiest paths, very rewarding one for sure, but not a simple one. And I think these are the questions, and there are more, of course, that relate to this important um, topic, because it's something that permeates our daily lives, and something that I think we have to continue to um, renew and re-question, because we are faced with uh, many aspects in our lives which are sometimes frustrating, sometimes difficult, sometimes seemingly impossible. So for me, it's always been about, why do I do this? And what does it mean? And why sometimes do I put myself through some of these difficulties? Because, as I said, it is rewarding, but it can be extremely challenging.
Yeah, I find that over the last year or two, I have been slowly learning who I am and what that means for me, how I want to relate to myself, how I want to relate to others, how I want to relate to this world. And what's really funny is that I think I actually, in my life, have felt my most authentic self at the piano on stage. And somehow the rest of the time I've forgotten how to be a human being. Or I've forgotten what that means. But somehow, perhaps because that's where I feel most comfortable in terms of expressing myself. There aren't any words, there's no need for words, and it's just purely what's inside. For me, authenticity and vulnerability are interchangeable. Vulnerability for me is being one's true authentic self. That's my definition. That's my personal definition of it. But then there's always so many challenges being a musician and trying to remain true to oneself and what we want to do versus what the audience might want, what the public might want, what the jury might want, what the managers might want, right? There's always something external. And
Of
I'm
course.
curious to know how you have dealt with that. You have so much life experience.
Well, the thing is, I've always thought, first of all, that we don't necessarily know what the audience wants. I'm not even sure that collectively speaking, the audience knows what it wants. I think the audience reacts to something. And then the audience, in terms of the audience that's out there, maybe before they get into the concert hall, let's say if we're playing and they're, before they get into the concert hall, what leads up to their getting into the concert hall, they may be reacting to a whole series of issues regarding publicity, marketing, exposure matters, how they know about us, in what way do they know about us, what they've read, and so forth. So obviously, a lot of what they might bring to the experience of being in the hall might be conditioned by many other things, perhaps unrelated to what we actually really do, until the point that we're having this, whatever one calls it, conversation, which means they're there, we're playing, and through the music we converse with them. Um, and, and I think, in a way, that also applies to the other groups of people that you mentioned, whether they're managers or recording producers or competition jury members and so forth. Um, in many respects, I think it's very much a two-way street, because, and I think this goes back once again to, who we are as musicians and what it is we're trying to do. That um, I'm not sure we can ever really know what, in quotation marks, they want. All we can really know is who are we and what it is that makes us feel like we should be there and that we have something to say. And it's interesting that some of the things I mean, it's always nice to hear compliments and so forth, but one of the things that I recall that somebody mentioned to me that actually had real meaning to me, because it resonated with something that I always thought was important in the whole artistic experience of communicating and what it's about. Somebody said, it's interesting, when I hear you play, I get the feeling that you just say what you have to say and that you leave it up to the listener to decide what they're going to do with that. And to me, amongst other things, that is what it's about and what it should be about. Um, some people might say, but isn't it like that with all people? Mm, I have to respectfully say I don't think so. I sometimes feel people are into trying to get people to feel a certain thing, trying to get them to think a certain thing. But if some people think, well, that strikes me as being basically dishonest, let's call it what you want. I'm not going to use labels. But isn't that true in life? I mean, there are people that just talk to you and say what they think, and there are other people who are, let's call it, it's maybe not a nice word, but trying to manipulate what
Mm.
uh, they would like you to feel. When we talk about honesty in music, it seems to me that that's an important subject. Not just honesty, but what that means to us. I know I've had endless discussions throughout the years. I mean, people have said, but don't you think all musicians are sincere? And I would say, all people always sincere? And I would say, no. they aren't. People are people, and we're complex and so forth. But why can we make? How can we make the assumption that because somebody is sitting at an instrument, in your case, behind an instrument, in my case, but speaking through music, how can we assume that every single person is speaking truly honestly? You talked about vulnerability. There are many people that don't in life like to show vulnerability. So they hide behind certain things, they erect certain facades and so forth, all of these kinds of things. If this is true in life, why wouldn't it be true in music? I think it is true in music. After that, it's for each of us, I think, to decide which way we're going to go. And it's not necessarily a calculation. It's a question of having a sense of who one is, and once again, why we do this. Um, it's not a question of deciding I'm going to be honest or I'm going to, you know, it's more complex than that. But I do think that there are important times in one's life, and it continues, I think, throughout the this whole process of life in music, of constantly re-examining what this is about. In my particular case, I think I answered that question long ago. It's still relevant today, and I keep asking it. I mostly ask it at the times when it seems like it's very tough and very frustrating and very hard, or I'm feeling very much pushed to the limit. But I have to say that ultimately and in the end, it just reinforces what I've always known as to why I'm doing this. And I consider myself lucky that way. And that's something that, let's say, when I talk to my own students or to young musicians and they ask questions about what is it, and I always say the same thing. The most important thing is to know yourself, know why you're doing it. What is it about for you? And to do it for what I would consider to be the right reasons, because it's something that is essential to your being. And you need you need that to express what you have to say, it's important that you express what you have to say. You were talking about feeling comfortable, more comfortable perhaps on stage at times. I know that for me it's even to the point where sometimes it's difficult for me to, I mean, I think I'm okay with people and so forth, but sometimes I think I would just have a better chance saying what I really feel if I could just sit behind the cello and say it that way. And I know that when I was a kid, and sometimes there were difficult moments at home, whatever that might have concerned. But as a kid, I always went up to my room and just started playing for a few hours because that was my way of sort of self therapy in a way. Um, and I'm sure I'm not alone there. And I think that established a certain relationship that has continued throughout life, because I know some musicians that when they're um, having uh, difficulties, I remember a long time ago I was playing a concert and I was going through difficulty in my personal life. It was a divorce, and um, I was playing with a pianist who was also having problems in his personal life, and he he called me up, and the day before he said, "I can't play the concert. It's just this is too difficult for me." And I was thinking, I understand that, and I don't judge that, but I, that's what I was looking forward to, was having the concert, because that's the place I felt like I was safe and I was me, and nobody could touch me there because it was my time to say what I had to say. And it's funny about that. I guess once again, that's an example of the relationship that I've always felt I had with how music is essential to that part of my being from the beginning.
Wow. Firstly, thank you so much for sharing. And oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to respond to. I'm going to try and remember everything. I want to backtrack to something you said. You used a key word, which was conditioning. This is going back talking about what we're conditioned to think, what we think others will think. um, there's a quote from a book by a British Indian monk, Jay Shetty. The book is called Think Like a Monk. And the quote itself is by someone else who now I'm forgetting, but essentially the quote is, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. Something like this. And it's incredible how very very often we're conditioned by society to seek external validation, to need the approval of others. And so many situations allow for that to continue happening. And yes, that's part of life. We are applying for schools, and there's a limited number of spots. We're applying for a job, limited number of spots. We're applying for a competition. Not everyone can be a first prize winner, you know? And so, sure, we are pitted against each other in that way that if we don't achieve that top goal, then we have failed, or we are nothing, or who are we? Who are we without that external validation? And I love how you speak about your relationship to music and to your cello, because I think that's exactly it. That perhaps we can't really know how to play some of this music if we don't know ourselves, because everything is ingenuine. And the question of who are we is is a never-ending existential question. But I suppose what I'm learning little by little is to firstly identify what are my values. And for me, at least personally, my top values are honesty, loyalty, integrity, trust, respect. And this is in my life as a person, as a human being, and this is in my life as a musician. The most important thing for me starting out when I'm learning a new piece of music is, okay, what is the composer's message? What did the composer want? Like, this is not a place for me to sit and tell my entire life story on stage. I am a channel, I'm a vessel through which this incredible art is being transmitted. I feel so lucky to be that vessel. I feel so lucky to be able to be a part of this incredible music. And yes, because of me, because of my personality, because I'm an individual human being, it will have my flavor on it. It will have my interpretation. But I think, at least for me, to start with composer, text, surroundings, and then me.
I think you're, of course, I'm in 100% agreement with you about everything you said. And I think for me, it must be that way. It can't be another way. And once again, some people who might be listening or who might be wondering, but isn't that true with everybody? And once again, I have to underline the fact that I think we all know that in life that's not always true, and of course that
Yeah.
therefore would be true in music. It, uh, it's very interesting. One time, I'm sure you've had these experiences. I always feel that for the concert going public or the potential concert going public, it can be really interesting and very, I think, enlightening to experience a public rehearsal or a rehearsal that's open to people.
Mm.
Now, of course, one could argue, well, can one be really the way one would like to be if there are people watching and so forth? I think so. I mean, it's possible it might change certain things, but I think yes, it's possible. I think if people are really willing to just be themselves, and which they should be in concert situations, why not in a rehearsal? This idea that rehearsals are about screaming and swearing and calling each other's names and this kind of stuff. I mean, it's very nice in Hollywood movies to have scenes like that. It can be very, crucial to maybe to the plot, but let's face it, it's a professional experience too, and of course there's a personal aspect, but you have reasonable people. It doesn't have to be like that. And the reason why I brought it up is just I remember a public rehearsal. It was in a chamber music situation. And at the end, we asked the people who were watching and listening if they had any questions. And there was one person that asked a question and stood up and addressed a question to me about, I'm very fascinated by this process because I didn't realize it was like this in rehearsal. You actually have to make choices. Can you explain this to me? And I said, well, okay, I will, but what did you think it was? And this person said, I thought you just played what's written. I
Mm.
said, well, that's a valid remark. But of course, no people, though we have the same source, see the same thing. No two people see it exactly the same way. And that's for a lot of different reasons. It's not necessarily a question of bad eyesight. It's a question of what what we interpret uh, in terms of what is written. And let's face it, and in case there's any perhaps confusion about that, what is written is only a vague roadmap as to what this music could actually sound like, what this expression could actually be. We have a series of dots, a couple of little marks, an accent, um, a dynamic marking, maybe an expression marking. But music cannot be reduced to that. What it actually is, like when we speak, Shakespeare writes a play. He can't write all the inflections. He just writes what is supposed to be said, and you have to figure out how you're going to say that. But that's essentially what we have in music. And I said, so two people, two people looking at the same thing aren't going to do it in the same way. And I said that would make sense, right? He said, well, I didn't really think it was like that. I said, well, what did you think? Because after all, you have to admit, you hear two people play the same piece and they don't play it the same way. Yes, I'm aware of that. I said, so to what how would you account for that? The person said, I thought it was strictly a question of talent. And I said, so what you're saying
Mm.
is there is one way everybody would want to play a piece, and that is what the composer writes. And the only reason why you hear different performances is that some people can do that and others cannot or can't do it as well. He said, it's exactly right. That's what I thought it was. When I
Wow.
hear something I like, it's because somebody is just better. And when it's what I don't like, it's they're not as good. I said, well, okay, that's reasonable, but I think it's actually much more complicated than that. And I started to talk a little bit about that. And of course, I said, obviously, there are people that have more talent and other people that have less talent. And even then, like in every other aspect of life, it's not just about that either. And there are different kinds of talents. So that was an interesting discussion because I thought that is very valuable because it's true. Some people have had a chance to go to the tennis court and hit the tennis ball around, or maybe go to a soccer field and kick the ball, or something like that. Not everybody has a chance to sit down at the piano and see what that's like to play the piano, or see what it's like to play the cello. So already there's an identification factor that might be a little bit more difficult. Um, and so it's true that in terms of the process and what it is that we actually do, I realized that there is a fairly high degree of, let's say, mystery about what it all is about. So I find that is very important, to have that chance. And once again, we're getting back to the kinds of things that we've been talking about, it's not just about all that, but it's about what the music means to you and you're why you're there. And there's that phrase that we've used before that I think is maybe a little bit simplistic, but there's a basic truth to it that, and I think you and I agree, we're there to serve the music, not for the music to serve us. Now, we all want to be successful. We all want to have maybe certain things. There's nothing wrong with that. But to me, the most important thing in the achievement of success, I've always felt, was to have the opportunities to express. And that's what it's about. If one doesn't
Mm.
have a certain amount of success, if there aren't enough people out there who, for whatever reason, appreciate what we do, we simply are not going to have the opportunities to go out there and do it. And that for me is the main thing, to have those opportunities, to have the audience and the occasion to actually be able to say what's important, which to me, for me anyway, I can only really say that way through music. And to a certain extent, let's say, in the teaching experience, of course,
Mm.
because that's also part of it. So I think for me, ultimately, I mean, I'm like anybody else. You know, I'm no better than anybody else. I, we all like to be appreciated. We all like for people to say nice things. But for me, in the end, it's more about having the opportunities to be able to say those things. And um, to a certain extent, there we go back to what you were talking about, how to sort of stay within our own sense of values and yet be aware that we don't live in an ivory tower. If we're sitting up there practicing the piano all day or the cello and nobody's interested to hear us,
Mm.
then what? So yeah, that's a problem. But I'm guessing that's just part of what we have to deal with in life on a larger scale beyond music, how we handle those issues as we go through life, you know, being true to ourselves and yet understanding that we're part of a larger existence and environment. And that's frequently not easy. I would even say sometimes extremely difficult.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. First of all, what a great story about about the rehearsal. And I think that I don't. I think sometimes we forget what it's like on the other side. We've been doing this for so long. I mean, you, of course, much longer than I, but that's very fascinating to hear that for some people, it was, they had this misconception that there's just only one way to do something. And I'm afraid that sometimes that misconception leaks into musicians as well. Like when we're learning, when we're studying, especially if we are not fortunate to have great teachers and great mentors and great guidance, we're sometimes taught that. And I actually, it's funny you mentioned Shakespeare because I actually use that example with my students that, you know, if someone's reading a text, reading a play, like, and you put five different people in five different rooms and you record them, every single person is going to read it differently because we all are different human beings. We all have a different mind. We all have a different perspective on life. So our interpretation of anything is going to be slightly different, exactly in the same way that we as musicians, every time we sit down at the instrument, it's going to be slightly different. Sure, maybe we have a general concept of what we are aiming to say with this music in this given period. But if you perform today and you perform tomorrow, it's going to be different because you feel different. The hall is different. The air is different. The audience is different. The moon is different. The you know, everything is different. And that in itself is a beauty and the magic of living art, of performing art.
I think that's one of the most important and key uh, aspects about it. What you just said, it's a living art. It's alive. It's alive,
Mm.
and um, I think that that is very that is very important. I see that amongst all musicians, but especially young musicians, because I do have a lot of contact with young musicians, and I know that whereas I'm, of course, confronted with all of these issues, they are very much so, and in many ways trying to make their way and so forth. So, in some ways, even more so, confronted with the various pressures and so forth. And I see how many people are either trained or how many people think they are meant to approach things a certain way, and I'm always there to try to suggest, don't put yourself in a box. Don't
Mm.
repeat it 175 times because you think that is the way you're supposed to get it. That may do certain things, but that's not necessarily the goal. And yes, but what? Of course. And these are things that, once again, we all want to be able to go out there and play, whatever that means. I'm still not clear as to what it means perfectly. Um, at the same time, to what extent does that really relate to what the real point is? That it should be a means to a higher goal. And I know for myself too. I mean, I'm like everybody else. I don't like to mess up. I don't like to miss things. I don't like to do things that I think will be embarrassing to me or humiliating to me, especially in public.
Mm.
But I've learned that over time, there's an interesting reaction that I have, that when I feel like my heart was in the right place and when my mind was connected to what I think is really important, when those things happen, it bothers me a lot less because I felt
Mm.
like I
Mm.
am human. I have to accept that. But at least I was aiming for the right things. And then it happens. And ultimately feel more satisfaction in that than being either scared about it or concerned about my ego or concerned about how I appear. And then even if I didn't do anything embarrassing, thinking that somehow I cheated myself with that. I
Mm.
got away with it, but what did I really get out of it? And okay, these are inner battles. It may be that some people don't think in those terms, but for me, uh, it is part of my experience, and I can always forgive myself much more easily and feel better and live with things when I feel like my my heart and my objectives were uh, channeled in the right way, at least for me. What the right way is. So, obviously, we go through this life and we're always trying to um, find balance and find a way to deal with the various pressures and the stress and so forth, and then go on and think, well, what can I do better? What can I do to improve myself? What can I do to improve the way my attitude about what I do, and how to get on stage and be more myself? And as you say, who are we really? I I I think if I could just address that for a minute, just for me, it's hard to decide what one is, but I always feel that somewhere inside, and maybe that's hard to describe, there is that sense of what it is. It reminds me, I don't know if you know this movie. Um, we were talking about old movies. It's not a horror movie, but it's a great one of it's considered one of the great classics of film noir. And you probably saw it. It's called Double Indemnity.
Mm.
You know this movie?
I actually haven't seen it.
No?
I will have to.
I think you would enjoy it. It's a great movie, but I won't tell the whole story. But essentially, there's a person who's trying. It's an involved story, but uh, one of the main characters is a person who works in an insurance office, and he's there to find out if claims are real or not. And he's played by a great actor, Edward G. Robinson, one of my favorite actors. And he's a kind of cranky guy who's lovable nonetheless. And he always says, I always know when it's real or not. There's this guy inside.
Mm.
There's this guy inside who tells me. And I think we all have that person somewhere. Whatever that is that a question of our upbringing? Is that a question of something even deeper than that? Just this voice or conscience that we
Mm.
have inside. But I think we all do. And I think it's important to be in touch with that person, that being, that voice, whatever it is. Um, I think maybe we all, to a certain extent, want to be certain things. I've talked to lots of young musicians about it because it's always been an issue for me, especially when I was younger. I want to play like this. I want to sound like that and all that. And I noticed after a while that was a dead end for me. Because at
Mm.
best, I could only be a second best version of the original. Do I want to go through my life being the second best or third or 10th or whatever best version of the original instead of being the best version of what Gary Hoffman can be? But the question is,
Absolutely.
who is Gary Hoffman? And I think I always knew deep down, but I maybe didn't always trust it. And I think that a lot of
Mm.
this has to do with trust and the sense that whatever anybody might think, whatever anybody might say about what you should be, the best thing you can be is the best version of yourself, whatever that is. And I think for me, that's the goal. And in playing and in any approach to music, how should this piece be played? We were talking about this before, and you were talking about the approach to playing and the values, honesty, and so forth. It has to do with those things because I think rather than I want to play this way, which is certainly a criterion, it is, but more importantly is what really resonates with the person that I am and what I feel deep down. And maybe
Mm.
it's time to get in touch with that. Wipe away the layers of, I want to be like this, I should be like that, I heard somebody else do this. What about what I am? And to find out, we admire all these musicians, especially, let's say, musicians from the past who've inspired us. And, you know, um, and I'm thinking, what is it that brought them to the people that we look at and think, yeah. And Horovitz always talked about that, being
Mm.
yourself. And that sounds great, but what does that mean? And I think in the end, he's absolutely right. And that's probably the hardest thing to do is to be yourself because we're bombarded by so much other information and other issues that sort of throw us off the track. But that's difficult. And this is difficult and the process is difficult. I'm always trying to encourage young musicians that I have contact with to try to do that. And I know very often it's answered, yes, 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 of course, that's true, but, but it's not possible today because you have to do this. And, yeah, I know all that, but I think that has to be the ultimate goal. It has to be the way. So the process is very hard. And nobody ever said it was going to be easy. So,
I agree. I agree with every single thing you've said. And to be to be the best version of ourselves that we can be, to be the best Gary, to be the best Pallavi, to be the best whoever, why would we want to be someone else when we can be ourselves? And sure, if we don't know who we are, or if we don't like who we are, maybe we want to be like someone else. If we don't have the same technical facility as XYZ, maybe we want to play like them. But this reminds me of a point, which is we all have different strengths to offer in this world as human beings. We all have something to offer in this world. Why should we focus on all trying to have the same goal when we can each bring something unique and beautiful and individual? I've long accepted that there are certain technical things that I don't have great facility for. And for other technical things, I'm a boss. And I will say that proudly. And so, why should I keep focusing? Yes, I want to work on those things. I work on them, but I don't need to fall into the rabbit hole of, I can't do that, so I'm not good enough, therefore I can't play. Like, that person is so much better than me. Comparison is the worst possible thing, I think, that we can do to ourselves, comparing ourselves to others. If we want to compare, let's compare to ourselves, to a past version of ourselves. Yesterday, I was able to achieve this. Let's see what I can manage today. Not that person, this person, that recording, that performance. No, let's focus inward, because when we're, and again, this is all stuff I'm learning, I'm recently learning, but at least learning to be conscious and aware of. But when we focus inward, we then are able to actually ask ourselves, like you said, what's important to me? What is authentic to me? What is genuine to me? And I want to challenge you on something you said earlier, using the word perfect. I actually don't believe anymore. I don't use the word perfect anymore, because I don't think perfection exists. And I think that's the beauty of life. And I actually love when I'm practicing or I'm on stage and something new happens, something spontaneous happens, and it's different and it's exciting. And yes, maybe I'll try to discover, hey, what just happened here? That was like a bit of magic, but I may try to discover that, but not to replicate it because now that's the only way it can be. But perhaps to replicate the feeling of spontaneity, the feeling of something magical happening. And there's that quote from Einstein, which is, the definition of insanity is to do something over and over again the same way, expecting different results, right? And when you were saying, before about, as students we repeat something like 170 times to try and get it quote unquote perfectly, or get it quote unquote the same way. Why?
Right, exactly. Well, no, you touched on very important issues, and uh, I agree with you in a way. What does that mean, perfection? When we use the word, we're almost invariably are referring to the same thing, technical perfection. And what is the definition of technical perfection? What is the definition of technique? I've asked people, what is technique? Very often people say, oh, well, it's stuff like playing loud and playing fast. I said, well, what is technique? I mean, what is the point of technique? I mean, isn't technique just the physical manifestation of a musical idea or impulse? What you have to do to produce it, that is technique. So, turning a phrase and creating this moment of magic where people would go, oh, isn't that technique too? And could that have been perfect? If you want to use the word, yeah. But it's not this sort of general idea of perfect means getting through a whole performance without doing anything where anybody noticed that you made a mistake or did anything that's cosmetically incorrect.
But then that's
I
like a
mean,
machine.
yeah, it's like a machine and ultimately superficial, and this is also very limiting, of course, to the artistic experience. You know, Picasso was, whether Picasso is everybody's favorite artist, what he was universally considered to be a great artist, and he was a great artist. I'm not sure that he was looking for perfection. He was looking for expressing what he had to say. And some of the things that we look at, we're thinking, some of the things that he did, he just dashed off like this, and it looks like he took 10 seconds. And was that about perfection? No, it was about expressing an impulse. And if people wonder, because I remember hearing people say, but come on, he was just pulling everybody's leg. It was nonsense. Well, I remember once in Paris many years ago, there was a huge exhibition of Picasso works, and they had some very early drawings and basically drawings. It was unbelievable. The guy could do anything that anybody ever could. And you think, okay, that's enough with all this nonsense about he was pulling everybody's leg and he was just, he could do anything. If he's doing this, it's because it's a representation of a thought or an expression or a philosophy or whatever it is. But it's not, because he's already proven time and time again what he could do. It's interesting. Something you said earlier
Mm.
made me remember something that happened when I was a kid. I was a student at Indiana University, and there was a concert series um, that occasionally some people like Horvitz or others came. There was Milstein, who
Mm.
I think is universally considered to be one of the great violinists of history. And that being said, and you were talking about things that maybe we feel we don't do so well, it was known that one thing Milstein was not, I'm sure he could do something, but it wasn't a strength for him. What's known as staccato, a group of notes in one bow that are separated. There's a famous piece that Heifetz played called the Horace Staccato, but whether it's up or down bow, this was not something that Milstein was known to be particularly good at. We never heard him do it, so we never knew. But one of the reasons we thought that is either we heard about that or we realized that we never saw him do that. Okay, fine. Does anybody care about that? No. But Milstein had a piece on the program, and I knew the program in advance, that has a couple of scales, rather in the virtuoso style, played staccato, whether one does them up or down, bow, but staccato scales. And I'm thinking to myself, why would he program a piece like that when he's going to be exposed doing something that he knows he doesn't do very well? And I knew already that Milstein was a very proud man. So I'm thinking, why is he doing this? What's he going to do? Is he just going to play it spiccato? That's kind of like, well, no, you don't do that. You're just showing people that you can't. That just doesn't sound like Milstein. So I'm thinking, what is he going to do? So I'm on the edge of my seat, and we get up to that passage, that scale. And you know what he did? He rewrote the passage. These are broken arpeggios. Instead of a scale, he played kind of an arpeggio figure going up to the top, and I thought, yeah. Now, that was very interesting. I'm not sure how many people in the audience noticed it or even realized what that was about. But I thought, there you are. You know, he wanted to play that piece. He wasn't going to play staccato because he didn't feel that was going to be, you know. So what did he do? He rewrote the passage. Now, I'm not saying that's what people should do, but it was just interesting to see the process and a person who obviously was a very proud man. But we all would agree that Milstein was a great violinist. And it wouldn't matter to us at all whether he could play that staccato or not. Our feeling about him wasn't going to be reduced to that. Oh, he can't play staccato? Clearly not a great violinist. And yet for him, he wasn't going to do that. Now that's really interesting. I don't know why I mentioned that story, but it always stayed with me. And I was just like you said, we do have to recognize we all do have weaknesses. His feeling was, I'm going to play the piece anyway, but I'm going to find another way around that. So having said that, I think it's important, to be sort of aware of those aspects, and also to know that, in the end, in his particular case, playing the Rondo Capriccioso of Saint-Saëns was not going to be reduced to whether he had a good staccato or not. You know, he found another way, and I think many people could say, well, why did he play the piece? Well, because he wanted to play the piece. Maybe he liked the piece. And so why didn't he just play it spiccato? That wasn't going to be the way he was going to approach that. It was going to have to be another way. And actually, I rather liked it. I didn't sit there thinking, oh, wow. I was thinking, yeah, that's okay. I get that. We all have a little bit of that pride and, that kind of thing. So he found his way. My teacher, Janos Starker, also considered one of the greatest cellists who ever lived. And he could do, anything on the cello. But I knew there were certain things that he didn't feel quite so comfortable with. And he generally didn't do those things. He found another way. He found another way. And I always thought, well, yeah, I mean, that was, as you say, authentic to him. And I think, I think that and there are things that I know that I've been weak with, let's say, technical things. I still try to work on them. I may never get them to be the way I would like them to be. I think there are things like that that are just for reasons that are hard to explain. For some people, they work naturally, and others, they just don't. You can improve them, but up to a certain point. And at that point, you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. Is that so bad? I mean, I don't think so. I think if we use our imagination, if we at least admit to ourselves, okay, that's not a strength, but I think there might be another way. I think that's intelligent and it's honest.
What a great lesson. What a wonderful life lesson, music lesson. And I completely agree with you. And I'm not saying that if one has, difficulties with one kind of, technical component, one should abandon that. That's not what I'm saying.
No,
But we
of
don't
course
need
not.
to fixate on the fact that I can't do that. Therefore, I'm terrible.
Yeah.
Which is the destructive the destructive way of thinking that starts to creep in if we're not careful.
Very much. Very much
Exactly.
so. Yeah.
Yeah,
And of course, what is easy for one person may be very difficult for another person. And I think we
exactly.
both know this is the case. And of course, in competitions, it's always very interesting to see people who are able to do certain things that we consider very brilliant technically. And then you give them the task of playing, let's say, a Beethoven sonata, and suddenly the things that they're not, let's say, so accomplished with, which could be very basic technical things like string crossing, playing legato, shifting. Maybe that wasn't so obvious in this very brilliant piece,
Mm,
but when it came to creating an unbroken and beautiful um, melodic line, uh, then these basic aspects, which most people would think, well, look, I mean, if you can play this technical piece at breakneck speed, you ought to be able to do that, right? No,
mm-mm,
not necessarily. If that's been sort of your focus all your life to be able to do that, and you have the physical ability to do so, chances are you have probably accomplished a fair amount in that direction, possibly at the expense of other things that when it comes to a situation that many people would think is technically not as demanding, suddenly the technical weaknesses come up. Really, string crossing. Well, I mean, I can play, faster than the speed of light. Great. But what about crossing from the D string to the A string in a Beethoven theme so that it doesn't actually break the line and you can ah, yeah. Suddenly the scales of the A major Beethoven for the cello become
mm,
incredibly difficult. And yet, put those scales in the Haydn C major last movement and you play them 15,000 times faster and it sounds incredibly brilliant. And many people would think, well, that person can do that. They can play those scales in the Beethoven A major sonata. That's two different things.
mm,
And it's interesting because, of course, as a young person, it's very, let's say, tempting and easy to get, let's say, focused on that aspect of technique. But what about the aspect of technique that isn't, say, so obvious or so impressive, maybe to the listener, but the aspect of technique that is probably something that will come up time and time again, like how do you connect two notes? How do you connect four notes? How do you make a phrase out of this? And then what happens to all the aspects of, let's say, on the cello, shifting, string crossing? How, you know, most people would say, well, that's pretty basic. It's interesting how often those basic things somehow seem to rear their ugly heads and create problems when we never thought that there was a problem, you know? And I'm sure
Absolutely.
that's true in the piano too. I mean, there are people who are constantly saying, yeah, sure, you can do that. But what about playing a legato phrase? What about that?
Mm. You know, it's funny. I really loved your definition of technique earlier. And I think that perhaps technique and virtuosity are conflated. I
Yeah,
don't think they're the same thing. I think virtuosity can be part of technique, but technique is so much more than virtuosity. Technique is sound, quality, your ability to have control of the instrument, to have control of your phrasing. And I say control not in a way to be tense about it, not in a way to, hold on to it, but to have mastery. Let's say mastery, to
yeah,
have mastery of your sound. And that kind of technique, that, that takes years and years and years to develop. And that takes one's ear. That takes really one listening and truly wanting to search for something higher, I think. And I tell that, we all heard this, at least I did when I was a kid, which was, don't separate the technique from the music. You can't just play the notes first and then add the music later. Yeah, sure, because they have to go together. Because you cannot make music, otherwise it's just notes. The technique brings out the music because technique is about sound. Technique is about phrasing. Technique is about legato, about articulation, about bow changes, string crossing, shifting, jumps, pedaling with the piano. I always tell my students, and this is what I learned, treat your feet like your third and fourth hands because they are an extension. And quote unquote technique with pedaling it's a skill. It needs to be developed.
absolutely. And when you talk about using your feet, that brings me to the whole subject of just one's relationship with one's body and how that important
Mm,
that is when one plays. And many people um, uh, ignore that, and if they're fortunate enough to work with somebody who uh, understands the importance of it and is able to bring light to the subject, obviously, it's not only, of course, what happens with the fingers or the hands or even the arms, but as you talk about an extension, the feet, the extension, you know, but everything we do with the part that is visible to the eye, which is in my case, the strings going down from pressure from the fingers or the bow moving because I'm manipulating with my right arm. But what about all the stuff that has led to that, to one's physical
right.
being, how one deals with the issue of sitting, balance, understanding of where power is generated, from where it's generated, how it's distributed, all these kinds of things. That's also, of course, in a very important way, part of technique and something that often is overlooked because it's not the part that people see or think about. They think it's all from here. Of course, when we're kids, we're very much fascinated by those things. And if we're lucky enough to have a teacher, as I was with Janusz Starker, who brings up these very important and, let's say, basic, but I don't mean basic in terms of it suggesting that they're rudimentary, but basic because they're essential to our being as musicians. An understanding of how the body and the instrument should be working together and how everything we do, with the idea that uh, everything that we do beyond that will somehow come back to that, and that must be dealt with, because if unless one does, in ways we may not be aware, or at least not aware of right away, that can hinder what it is we would like to do. Let's say with our fourth finger, or the, our thumb on the bow, or any other things. And it's true, it's all very much related. These are, of course, things that perhaps the concert listener may not be aware of, but
Mm.
I think it's something that, of course, we must be, and is very much part of technique, um, and part of how we integrate all the things that we feel and think, but also feel physically, and how much they have to go hand in hand. Much like, as you said, technique and music, they can't be separated. This can't be separated either. Um, it's all, of course, when we're dealing with people who have an unusual amount of talent, they can be perhaps producing certain very good things in ways that are not necessarily the most, let's say, efficient or natural. And sometimes I've I've noticed I've had some comments or criticism from people after a masterclass. Why are you bothering the person with the way he's sitting or she's sitting? They play really well. Why are you bothering that? Because I'm not here to compliment the person about how well he or she plays. I'm here to help them play better. I'm
Mm,
here to help them improve.
mm,
So if my job is that, which is what I think it is, if they have something that I think is hindering them from going to the next step, I'm here to address that. Not here to say, oh, it sounds really good, there's nothing to be said. And sometimes that's confusing to people. It's like, well, I don't really understand why you you're bringing up that subject. And my point is because I'm here to help them get to the next stage. And
mm,
that strikes me as well. I think that's the right way of approaching these things. There's no absolute. What what is somebody's ending point, if that is, may not be somebody else's. You know,
right. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, this still, I know it sounds like we're digressing, but actually, at the end of the day, this all goes back to knowing ourselves. This all goes back to that. What are we trying to achieve? What is our purpose with each and every action and choice that we make, whether it's as people or as artists, at the instrument, in musical decisions? And just as a final thought, the point about the point about our body relating to our body and dropping into our body is, I think, important both as artists physically with our instruments, or if you're dancing or probably even painting or whatever, and also as human beings. That, and I say this to my students all the time, yes, we are all built differently. So something that is physically comfortable for me, whether it's the height that I'm sitting at, the distance from the piano, or the way I release my wrist, or the way I move my arm, yes, this is what works for me. And I am aware that we all have extremely different bodies. Every single person is going to function slightly differently. However, the goal is not to play like me. The goal is for you to find a way that works in the most efficient way for you. I always say, like, minimum effort with maximum result. And I don't mean minimum effort in terms of like laziness. I mean minimum effort in terms of as efficient as you can be with your body.
exactly.
Um, that's a little bit of a digression,
No,
but
not at all, actually, because it goes back to what we've been talking about. Sort of, it's been a running theme throughout this conversation about knowing oneself. And of course, when one is young, it's normal to have models and let's say heroes and people that we look up to and so forth. And that's great. I mean, that can help sort of define certain things. But I think in the end, what it should be defining and what it should be giving us a chance to do is figuring out who we really are. And it's normal that when we see something that somebody does that we admire, that we want to do it like that. But you're absolutely right. There are days when I go to teach and I'm the first one in the room, and there's a piano bench that's been put there for the students, and it's all the way up, and I'm always complaining that today almost everybody, not everybody, sits much too high. It's just the way, it's something that many people do. Now, I agree with you. For some people that might be good, but it depends on their body type. It depends on the proportion of the length of their thigh to their lower leg and all kinds of the torso and everything. So I'll go into the room and I put the piano bench all the way down, not because I want people to sit lower, because I want them to think about it when they come in.
Mm,
Adjust it to you. What
mm,
happens? The first person comes in, it goes all the way up, and then nobody changes it for the rest of the day. And that annoys me to no end because I'm thinking, it's fine. If you really believe that's the way you should sit. So sometimes it, don't you think you might be singing a little bit high? Oh, I didn't think about it. Now, maybe as a pianist, you're always thinking about that because, of course, you know that people sit different heights and there's an adjustable piano bench. Cellists often have a chair, they don't have a piano
mm,
bench. But when you have a piano bench, it gives you an option to find what is best for you. And it's surprising that many people don't even think about it. And
mm,
that's what bothers me. I'm not saying it has to be a certain way, but you should think about it. You should have an idea of what is really best for you. And it takes a long time to figure that out. And it takes a long time to figure what the angle of the cello should be and what the length of the end pin is. And it takes some years understanding how this all works together. Think about it, figure it out, deal with it. Just don't take what's there. And that's why. So I go back next time I go to teach, I'll probably do the same thing. The piano bench is going to go all the way down, and then let's see what happens.
And I suppose also, like in life, we're always changing. And yes, maybe after a certain point, we stop physically growing, at least vertically. We start to have a different relationship with our body as we get
Very
older.
much.
And I, to be honest, sometimes I will adjust the bench between pieces because with certain pieces, I feel that I need to be a hair lower in order to feel a little bit more weight, or maybe I need to be a little bit higher in order to
Yeah.
feel more weight. It just depends. It could
Yeah.
also depend on on the heaviness of the piano. But anyway, we are digressing now. But what a wonderful conversation! Thank you so much for this conversation,
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. I mean that.
for your expertise, your experiences, your stories, and as I said in the beginning, your generosity of soul, because this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I really truly respect and admire who you are as a person and as an artist. And every time we talk, I just learn so much. So thank you, Gary.
Thank you so much. It's been great, and all the best for all the times coming up. We have some challenges facing us, but we'll get there, and we're going to persevere. And in the meantime, we're all just going to hope for the best and know that in the end, we always have the music and what it means to us to get us through all these difficult times. And, thank God for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gary.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page at Conscious Artist Podcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength, and we will see you next time for another episode of The Conscious Artist.